So, I want to talk to you about something that almost nobody in this space talks about. And you can build the perfect system: the checklist, the 3R rule, the FAQs, the ownership contract, all five documents in place, and then the manager is signed off. And everything looks exactly like it should. And then 60 days in after implementing the system, you look up and you realize nothing has changed. The manager still brings things to you that they should be handling. Staff are still asking questions the FAQ answers, and work is still queuing on your desk. And your first instinct is to think, well, I don't think my team actually gets it. But here's what I've seen happen over and over again when I'm inside these firms. You see, the team gets the new system fine, but they're just responding rationally to the environment they're actually in, not the environment you think you created. And that distinction between the environment you intend and the environment you're actually running, that's what this whole video is about. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. When you build the system you're thinking about, via the documents, via the checklists, via the protocols, via the written standards, your staff is not responding to this document in particular, but responding to signals. Every time you answer a question that was in an FAQ, you sent a signal that it's faster to ask than to look it up. Every time you stepped into a review that belonged to a manager, you sent a signal. The ownership contract isn't really enforced. Every time you made an exception to the 3R rule because it was a busy week, or you sent a signal, and the line moves when things get hard. And none of these moments felt significant in isolation. In fact, each one had a perfectly reasonable explanation. But the staff is not reading in individual moments, they are learning a pattern. And the pattern said, the old way still works here. So they kept on using it. And that's the thing about behavior change that makes it so hard. You see, it doesn't require a decision to revert. It just requires absence of a reason not to. If using the new system and using the old system produce similar outcomes, people tend to drift towards the familiar one, not because they're resistant, but because familiarity lowers effort. And lower effort is rational when stakes don't appear different. So the question isn't, how do I get my team to change? The question is, how do I make the new behavior the obvious default? Because if you have to rely on motivation and discipline to keep a new process going, the game is lost. Why? Motivation runs out, discipline gets depleted by tax season. But what doesn't run out is environment. Because if the right environment makes the right behavior easier than the wrong one, people do the right things without deciding to do, without effort, without reminders, without having to think too much about it. And that's what you're building. Not compliance, not motivation, environment. Let me give you 3 specific things that create this reversion to building the right environment, and replace each one with. So the first one is the open door problem. Here is you are available, you're reachable, you're reachable in your office, you're on Slack, your phone is always on, and your team knows it. So when something comes up that they could handle in the FAQ, they weigh 2 options. They either look it up themselves, which takes a few minutes and involves some uncertainty, or they ask you, which takes literally 30 seconds and produces a certain answer. So rationally, they ask you every time. Fixing isn't becoming less helpful, it's creating friction around asking that matches the friction of looking it up. And the way to do this is a simple protocol. Before you come to me with a question, tell me which part of the FAQ you checked and why it didn't cover your situation. And that sentence changes the entire dynamic completely, because now looking it up is required before asking. The FAQ becomes the first stop instead of the fallback. And something else happens too. When they come to you already having checked the FAQ, and the FAQ doesn't cover their situation, that's actually useful information. You add the entry, the system improves. The next person who hits that situation finds the answer without asking. The open door creates reversion, and it starts creating. The open door stops creating reversion and it starts creating a better FAQ. The second exception problem is you made an exception once, a reasonable, a busy period, an unusual situation. You stepped in when technically you shouldn't have, and your team noticed, not consciously, but they filed it away. So the rule has an exception, they say, and if the rule has one exception, there might be others. So they test the edges, just push the boundaries, bring things that are closer to the 3R threshold, just to see what will happen. And sometimes you step in again, because again it's reasonable in the moment, and this is how the 3R line dissolves, not with a decision per se, with exceptions that accumulate until that line is gone. The fix is treating exceptions as system feedback rather than isolated decisions. Every time you're tempted to make an exception, ask yourself one question first. Is this situation genuinely an R, or am I stepping in because it's easier than holding the line right now? If it's genuinely an R, handle it and document why. Add it to the protocol. Make the line more specific so the situation is covered explicitly next time. If it's not in an R, don't handle it and tell your manager why it's not an R. That conversation sharpens the judgment and it makes the line clear for them. It's worth having even if it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. The third one is the invisible standard problem. Your manager is reviewing returns, they're using checklists, they're signing off, but somewhere in the back of their head, they're still wondering, is this good enough? Does this actually meet the standard? Will the partner find something I missed? And that uncertainty, even when the work is genuinely good, creates gravitational pull back towards asking you to confirm it. Not because the manager lacks confidence in general, but because the standard was never made explicit enough for them to measure their work against. The checklist tells them what to check. The quality standard tells them what good looks like. But until they've had enough feedback cycles to know their judgment is calibrated, they're not fully certain. The fix is deliberate feedback on the spot checks. Not just whether the work was right, but specifically where the judgment matched yours and where it diverged. What they caught that they should have caught, what they missed, and what they signed off on correctly. Specific feedback on judgment calibration, not just output quality, is what builds the internal standard, the internal confidence, the feeling of this is good enough and I know why. And when that feeling exists, the pullback toward confirmation disappears. The manager stops needing your reassurance because they've developed the ability to reassure themselves. And here's the thing I want you to take away from today. Your staff don't revert because they're resistant to your new system. They revert because the environment kept signaling the old way was still acceptable. And you control the environment. Every exception you make, every question you answer that the FAQ covers, every time you step into a review that you were supposed to be out of, you're resetting the environment back to what it was. And every time you hold the line, even if it's convenient, you're reinforcing the new one. That's not about being rigid. It's about being consistent enough that the new environment becomes as familiar as the old one. 60 days of that consistency and the reversion stops. The reversion stops. Not because your team changed, but because your environment finally did. On Thursday, I'm going to give you 3 specific interventions that make the new behavior stick permanently. Not just 60 days, but permanently. And with that, I will see you on Thursday.